Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me, and I might just start off by saying Happy Thanksgiving. The day before Thanksgiving is a time in which a lot of people are traveling. The estimates are about 48 million. I suspect it might get all the way up to 50 million people will travel at least 50 miles from their home over this holiday period. And it's interesting because the Associated Press put it this way: determined to reclaim Thanksgiving traditions that were put on pause last year. You remember that? I think we all do. By the pandemic, millions will be loading up their cars, piling into airplanes, gathering with family and friends. I'm going to talk about that for just a few minutes, and then we're going to get into some other issues in the news, which I think are relevant. If you go to our website today, you'll see that I have a couple of articles having to do with looting. Now, first of all, one of the articles says that the experts are saying we shouldn't even call it looting. I mean, after all, we wouldn't want to tell people that are looting that they're looters, because it might hurt their feelings. So, we will get into that whole issue of political correctness a little bit later. But we are going to also, of course, have the Thanksgiving theme, and that is in about a half an hour. Our good friend Dr. Jerry Newcombe will be with us. And a couple of months ago, he sent to me this video, I'm showing it to you right now, called The Pilgrims. And they've made it possible for you to actually watch this with your family. They have a streaming link, and you can either, of course, download it and own it, or you can rent it. And it is just kind of a who's who of people we've interviewed on this program about the Pilgrims and about American history: Os Guinness, Eric Metaxas, John Eidsmoe, Cal Beisner, David Gibbs, Peter Lilback, all those individuals we've interviewed, as well as Marshall Foster, Daniel Dreisbach, and others. And then it also has a number of guests that just have very short comments there. Dennis Prager is one of those individuals, Alveda King, Bill Federer, Rod Gregg. I mean, every one of those individuals we have interviewed. And so I thought it would be important for you to say, I would like to know something about the Pilgrims. We have a culture that has decided it wouldn't do anything to honor them. And you might even see today that we have posted my Thanksgiving quiz, which is something you can use around the table tomorrow. But also we will be talking about the fact that this last year was the first time in a centennial of the 1620s, the celebrations that were very significant celebrations that took place in the past. Probably one of the most significant was in 1820, which was the bicentennial of the landing of the Pilgrims. You have this very famous speech that was actually given by Daniel Webster at Plymouth Rock. Even in 1920, you had, didn't you have Harding and Coolidge there and some others? But, of course, everybody doesn't want to talk about it now because the Pilgrims are relegated to an evil past. They were not, by the way. They had probably the best relationship with Indian tribes, and we do have some very sad chapters in American history on everything from slavery to the Indian Wars, but that's not one of those. But nevertheless, we can't talk about the Pilgrims on mainstream media. That's why we thought we would do some conversation with our good friend Jerry Newcombe in the first hour. The second hour, we'll get back to some of the issues in the news, and I might also mention that we're going to bring in a few of our staff members. You've had a chance to hear from, for example, our producer, which would be Steve, and one of the people we'll have around the table is Ivy. She has been occasionally on here, but we're also going to have some other people, Karen and Ron and others. Just a kind of chance to introduce them real quickly so that you kind of know the people behind Point of View, and also you can be praying for them and just get to know them a little bit better. Then we'll get back into a few final comments. So we have a lot to cover, but let's again recognize that this is a travel day, and the argument that is being made is this still could be dangerous because even though we have, and I think the numbers I have in front of me here are about 200 million Americans that are fully vaccinated, we also recognize that you have had in some places where we broadcast a significant number of patients in the hospitals. And many of those tend to be either in the Midwest or the Southwest, which I thought was kind of interesting. And if you look at the figures that we used to talk about quite often and rarely mention now that come from Johns Hopkins University, or if you look at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there is still a little bit of a concern, but I think most Americans have said that we are going to see aunts, uncles, grandparents, granddaughters, all those kinds of individuals are going to be traveling either today or tomorrow. As a matter of fact, it's amazing how many people have decided they're going to travel tomorrow. There's a very good reason for that, because the airlines, and I'm thinking of you, Southwest Airlines and American Airlines, had more than 2,300 flights a while back that were canceled due to weather or a variety of other issues, not having enough pilots, flight attendants, workers, whatever. And so everybody is hoping that none of that kind of disaster unfolds today. It doesn't look like it will, but you never know. But the other part of that is, do we actually have enough people working with the TSA? That would be the Transportation Security Administration. And the answer is, as best we can determine, already 93% of TSA employees are in compliance with the mandate. And let me explain that. That means that they've actually had the two vaccines, if it's a two vaccine like Pfizer or Moderna, long enough ago that they would qualify. There are some that were wanting to reach the deadline, which is December 8th, maybe just got vaccinated a week ago, but until 2 weeks unfolds, they wouldn't be in that category. I've already seen some people say now it's up to 95% of federal workers, so that doesn't seem to be an issue and doesn't seem like it's going to be too much of a slowdown or disruption, but you have to recognize when we're talking about 48 million people traveling, of course a lot of them will be by car, those going on airplane, that's going to cause a bit of an issue. Real quickly, we've talked about this in the past, and I think it's worth mentioning again. We even provided some resources a couple of years ago when we said, when you come to Thanksgiving, sometimes the conversation turns to politics. And I thought this was interesting. This came out from, I guess it's Margie Peterson. How to talk about politics and the pandemic and get along with your family at Thanksgiving and other holidays. Apparently, there's some concern that this will be thermonuclear if you sit around the table and raise any one of the P's, whether politics or the pandemic. So giving some suggestions and advice on maybe setting some ground rules, certain things we shouldn't talk about. If you know that there's just one of those ones, and of course they talk about Cousin Billy, or of course you had on Saturday Night Live, you had Drunk Uncle. That was Bobby Moynihan, one of these individuals that are a little bit like the stereotype. Maybe you want to talk to them before you get together, but it is interesting that we're seeing some articles already surfacing today about how to talk about politics and the pandemic and get along with your family at Thanksgiving and other holidays, because they also talk about Hanukkah and some of the others. And then one other one. Don't know what to make of this. You need to appoint a Thanksgiving COVID bouncer. And here, Margaret says, no one really wants the job, but millions of households may need their own Thanksgiving bouncer. The cover charge is a negative COVID test done ahead of arrival or outside the front door. And so it talks about how you could implement that, whether or not an individual is vaccinated, whether they've had the two vaccinations, whether they have the booster, whether they've actually had the PCR test and a number of others, also the rapid antigen test. And who would have guessed that if I had said this 2 years ago, that these would be the kinds of things we'd be talking about at Thanksgiving? You wouldn't have believed it. But here we are in 2021. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Thanksgiving is tomorrow, and I suspect that you are doing lots of things to get ready for this special day. Let me suggest you add one more item to your to-do list. Visit our website and download a copy of my Thanksgiving quiz. Thanksgiving is a wonderful time to gather as a family, but I also believe that it can be a great time to teach our children and grandchildren about America's godly heritage. I created this short quiz to be a conversation starter around the Thanksgiving table. You know, we used to go around the table before the meal and ask our children to tell us what they were thankful for. After a few years of hearing about how they were thankful for their cat, their doll, their video games, I knew we needed to do something else. The Thanksgiving quiz was born out of that frustration. It has 19 questions and answers on the Pilgrims and the Mayflower Compact, as well as some questions and answers about the Christian heritage of America. Who were the Pilgrims, and why did they leave Europe for America? Why did they celebrate Thanksgiving? What is the Mayflower Compact, and why is it significant? What lessons did the Pilgrims learn about work and even free enterprise? How did the Christian faith influence America? These are just a few of the sort of questions that you can ask around the table and give short answers. Perhaps it is time to recapture the importance of Thanksgiving. On the bicentennial celebration of the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, Daniel Webster declared the following: "Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light and labored in its hope, and they sought to incorporate its principles with the elements of their society and diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, or literary." It is my hope that this quiz will help your family see the importance of Thanksgiving. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, day before Thanksgiving, lived a little bit later. As a matter of fact, after we have in the next hour a chance to hear from some of our staff, I'd love to hear from you as well what you're thankful for. So we'll certainly do that in about an hour from now. But let me just mention, in about 15 minutes, we're going to have Dr. Jerry Newcombe with us, and we'll talk about this film, The Pilgrims, and maybe some lessons we can learn. And I love to use, whether it's the 4th of July or Constitution Day, when the Constitution was ratified, or in this case, Thanksgiving, to use that is an opportunity to teach. And so in just a minute, I'm going to talk about the fact that we have access to the Thanksgiving quiz that I put together, and I'll explain more about that. But even before we get into it, if you've been paying attention to some of my commentaries, 2 days ago, I talked about how some of the skeptics are very critical of Christian ideas, including a belief in the afterlife, which is amazing given the fact that we, of course, had Lee Strobel on the program recently with his book, The Case for Heaven, and so many other topics. But yesterday's commentary I didn't really have a chance to mention, but I thought I'd come back to it for just a minute, because the title of it is probably a little arresting to some of you. It's called Atheist Praise Christianity. And I give you a couple of examples of individuals who are certainly not Christians, certainly could not sign the doctrinal statement of your church, to put it mildly, but nevertheless, sometimes begrudgingly, sometimes somewhat enthusiastically admit that we are the beneficiaries of so much in the Western world because of Christianity. And we have a very positive impact that Christianity has made on Western civilization. Now, if you are at Thanksgiving having kids come home from college, You know as well as I do that some of these kids that have taken a history class, although they don't teach that much anymore, Western history is hardly a required subject in most secular universities, or a religion class or whatever, they will come down and around the Thanksgiving table tell you all sorts of evils about America. And I'm the first to admit that we have some dark chapters in American history. But when all you do is focus on the Salem witch trials or the Trail of Tears or chattel slavery, all of which are very true and certainly need to be talked about as well, and you ignore all the other positive aspects of Christianity, that's not a fair idea. And so what I thought it was interesting to do was to go back and pick out just a couple of individuals. One of those is Jonathan Van Maren, who writes about a number of atheists who he calls King Agrippa Christians. He says after the Apostle Paul gave his testimony and the gospel, the king said, "I'm nearly persuaded." Now, none of these atheists, he said, that he's mentioned have become Christians, but he does acknowledge that there has been quite an important and very positive contribution that Christianity has made to our world. The other example I use is actually an individual I invited onto this program. From time to time, I do have atheists on this program, and that individual was the historian Tom Holland, who wrote the book Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. Now, here is an atheist. He is not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination, but he makes a very compelling case for Christianity. And Christian writers, oftentimes that have read that, use that as very positive examples. And so we were able to actually have him come on the program. So you can go back and listen to it. But he reminds us that the world we take for granted today, a world that talks about compassion, a world that expects people to do the right thing to the poor and the downtrodden, was not the world of the ancient world. For example, the ancient world was very cruel. Spartans, for example, routinely killed off imperfect children. The bodies of slaves were treated pretty much like outlets for physical pleasure. Very few citizens had rights. And he explains that the ideas that Christianity brought to the world, views about sex and marriage, about the demand for men to control themselves, to place sex within marriage and monogamy, to elevate the status of women, and all the other things that he talks about, even in one of the first chapters, is something that is a very positive contribution of Christianity. And he basically argues that without Christianity, the Western world as we know it really would not exist. And this is, I think, really important to imply. One of our particular booklets that we've made available in the past talks about worldviews through history. And we have an individual who I've known who is a professor in Connecticut. Matter of fact, I spoke in his church, points out that really to get the Western world, you need Rome, or Greece and Rome, plus Christianity. And his argument is that as we have turned our back on Christianity, we've turned back to something that looks a lot more like Greece and Rome, and that's not necessarily positive. Which brings us to the Thanksgiving quiz that we have posted on the website today. And I put this together, and you've probably heard me if you've listened to this program any length of time, know that I finally did it out of a sense of frustration, because my wife and I would sit around the table with our kids, and we would go around and say, okay, what are you thankful for? And after a year or two of I'm thankful for my cat, I'm thankful for my dog, I'm thankful for my video games, I said, okay, we got to do something a little better than this. And so we take some of the questions about the Pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact, and even some of the aspects of Christian heritage, and then we ask questions. And the one we've posted is, I think, 20 questions. I think here I mentioned 19, because sometimes I take out the proclamation just to make it a little simpler. But, you know, why did we celebrate Thanksgiving? Who were the Pilgrims? What about the Mayflower Compact? What was it important for? What kind of lessons could we learn about work and even free enterprise? And it's just a reminder of how much that was a very significant opportunity. And if you think about the first Thanksgiving, which was in 1621, today we are celebrating the 400th anniversary of that Thanksgiving celebration. And after that first year, I mentioned this in my Sunday school class, and somebody said, are you sure that's right? And I said, yeah, half of the pilgrims died in the first winter, but we'll have Dr. Jerry Newcombe validate that as well. And so you had William Bradford proclaim a day of Thanksgiving. Perhaps the most famous one was in 1623, 2 years later, when they had a day of fasting and prayer because of the drought, and then a gentle rain came down and saved them. So you've had, all sorts of lessons that have come from Thanksgiving. First of all, this whole concept of religious liberty. Why did the pilgrims first leave England and go to the Netherlands? To escape the persecution under those believing that everyone had to be a member of the Church of England. Why did they leave the Netherlands to come here to the United States? Because they wanted to practice their religious freedom. And so that lesson is certainly there. You have, of course, the political freedom of the fact that when they landed here, they did not have a charter, so they established the Mayflower Compact, which even one of my secular professors when I was at Georgetown admitted was really kind of the first constitution in America. And then we have another lesson, of course, of economics as well, because they were required basically by the charter that they had from England to harvest everything and put it into the common stores, and then to receive what they needed from those common stores. And as I've said, essentially they had a system which was each produced according to their ability, and then each received according to their need. Long before there was a Karl Marx, that was kind of the philosophy in the Plymouth colony, and it didn't work very well. And after a disaster, William Bradford said, you know what, we need to have something that has some entrepreneurial opportunities here. So he did begin to provide private plots for individuals who could then benefit from what they raised and then trade or sell and benefit from that. And that's when the colony began to thrive. So there's a lot of lessons we can learn, but it is interesting that on the bicentennial back in December of 1820, they gathered together under the speech by Daniel Webster, and this is just part of his speech. He said, "Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light and labored in its hope. They sought to incorporate its principles with the elements of their society and to diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, or literary." There is such a desire, I think, on the part of many of us who are Christians to say there were some very good lessons we can learn from the Pilgrims, from the Plymouth colony. And so at a time when we want to encourage you to be thankful for everything that God has blessed you for, we hope that you also, as we kind of sit back now and learn a little bit about some of the story of the Pilgrims, as well as maybe some of the lessons we can learn from Thanksgiving. And if you'd like to join us, we certainly welcome your phone calls. Next hour, we'll probably even open up for you to maybe talk about those things which you're thankful for. And we certainly hope that this would be an opportunity for education and encouragement. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about a film that you actually can watch at home if you would like to do so, or on your computer. It's called The Pilgrims. And it's very well done and provides a lot of great interviews that I know you would want to hear about. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. 5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Glad you can join us on this day before Thanksgiving. We're going to focus our time and attention now on the Pilgrims and lessons we can learn from them and the Plymouth Colony. And we bring to the microphone our good friend, Dr. Jerry Newcombe, who is the executive director of the Providence Forum, but also you probably best know him as the senior producer and on-air host at Truths That Transforms, which is, of course, the television broadcast of the D. James Kennedy Ministries, individual that graduated from Tulane Wesleyan University, also with degrees from Wheaton Graduate School and a doctorate from Knox Theological Seminary. We've talked about so many of his television documentaries, about 80 of those in all, some of those having to deal with this very topic, America's Christian Roots, author of nearly 36 books. And Dr. Jerry Newcombe, always great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Kerby. I appreciate it.
Let's, if we can, talk a little bit about this particular DVD that I have. Of course, what you're making available to our listeners is Foundation of American Liberty series. And this is, before I had you on the program, really a chance to hear from all sorts of individuals that we've interviewed and you've interviewed as well, like Oz Guinness and Eric Metaxas and John Eidsmoe and people like Cal Beisner and Peter Lilleback, as well as Bill Federer, and even some guests that you've had on the program like Dennis Prager and Marshall Foster. So lots of great material. But tell us, first of all, about this particular film. And then we want to talk about, as we have a link on our website, how people can watch it. They can either rent it or actually own it. So tell us more about the production of this film.
Sure. First of all, it's an hour long, and it is, as you said, part of a series. And the series is not even completed yet, but the series is called The Foundation of American Liberty. And if anybody asks me, well, what's the foundation of American liberty? And the answer is our Judeo-Christian heritage. Our rights come from the Creator. That's the single most important thing to realize about the whole American experiment. America's experiment is this, so simple, self-rule under God. That's really what it boils down to. And so my goal in this whole series is to demonstrate that and just show that and to just basically to tell America's story. And so this first episode, which is the one we'll focus on today, if that's all right, is the whole thing about the Pilgrims. And I appreciate you letting me talk about that. By the way, Providence Forum, which was founded by Dr. Peter Lobeck and given to D. James Kennedy Ministries, is now a part of, indeed, Coral Ridge Media. So we're so excited about this. But this year in particular is significant because this is the 400th anniversary of Plymouth, of Thanksgiving, rather, in Plymouth. Last year was actually the 400th anniversary of the founding of Plymouth. And so many amazing things happened there from the Pilgrims. And all they wanted, Kerby, all they wanted was to worship Jesus Christ in the purity of the gospel. That was their goal, to not be, harassed by the government for not conforming to the Church of England's views or, anything like that. They just wanted to worship in peace. And so they ended up relocating initially from mid-England, then down to Holland, and then over to America. And it was one particular congregation. That's why Dr. D. James Kennedy said that, if you will, America began as a church relocation project. And clearly, inasmuch as the Pilgrims helped, sow the seeds of the nation to become America, that is a very fascinating observation.
Let me just mention, too, that we have a trailer that you can find. Simply go to our website, which is pointofview.net, and then go to the particular statement there that says see more. Scroll down. You'll first of all see a picture of Jerry Newcombe, and then I have a piece which I call the Pilgrim's Film, and then it takes you to this. You can scroll down and see all the accolades it's received from so many individuals, and then the trailer is less than 2 minutes. By the way, I might just mention for some of you that film has also been translated into Chinese using subtitles and a number of other things. So it is something that you could use to even have an outreach. And then you say, well, I might like to show that tonight or tomorrow, and we'd like to watch it. There's a place that you can go to actually download it if you want to own it, or simply rent it for the day and show it. And so that is the case. Of course, I'm the old school. I've got the DVD right in front of me here. And I might just say, Jerry, I've watched this before. Go ahead. I watched it before. You sent it to me.
I'm sorry.
And when you had sent it to me, I said, this is so well done. And it's just a veritable who's who of people that you've had a chance to interview, isn't it?
Well, I'm so grateful that Dennis Prager gave me some time to do it. Billy Falling, a wonderful Native American, did so. A Catholic priest and Father Leon Hutton participated. Elvita King, Bill Fetter, my good friend, and then some of the experts in Plymouth itself, including Paul Jaley, Leo Martin, William Wrestling Brewster, who's a direct descendant of the original de facto pastor of the Pilgrims, Elder William Brewster. There's also an author named Rod Gregg who wrote a book called The Pilgrim Chronicles.
Right.
I think in terms of contemporary books, Rod Gregg's book is probably the single best book on the subject of the Pilgrims. And what I did, by the way, is I drew heavily from original sources. So, I'm very careful about today's sources because there's been a lot of rewriting of history. So I wanted to hear, well, what did William Bradford himself say? He was the one, he was living there. He was the great chronicler of the Pilgrims. So we used Plymouth Plantation, and I used writings from Cotton Mather from 1702, the great works of Christ in America. Also, America's first great historian, George Bancroft, who wrote a history of the United States of America in 6 volumes, and the Pilgrims show up in volume 1. And then another contemporary American, I mean, he's not American, but a contemporary writer that I do trust is Paul Johnson, the great British historian. And he wrote a book called A History of the American People. And I drew from that book as well, not only for this particular episode of the Pilgrims, but also for other parts of the whole program. So my goal was to get back to original sources. One of the sources.
I think I lost him there, so we'll get him back in just a minute. While we do that, let me just mention that, interestingly enough, he was mentioning Rod Gregg, and you might say, I might like to hear an interview with him since he has written this very good book, The Pilgrim Chronicles, an eyewitness story of the Pilgrims and founding of Plymouth Colony. You might say, well, where can I hear that? Well, as you might guess, you can hear it here on Point of View. We have played it a couple of times. The most recent time we played it, because we did the original interview, but we played it on Thursday, November 28th, 2019. So if you go to that one or to the original, which was November 22nd, 2018, you're going to find a couple of really great interviews on the Pilgrims. And so that's Rod Gregg, and certainly one of the resources that we would also want you to have available to you. And while we're getting Jerry Newcombe on, we'll get him on after the break, I guess. Let me just mention again that this particular film is called The Pilgrims. And in a time when I think it is more important than ever to learn some of the lessons from the Pilgrims, the lessons of religious liberty. How many times have we talked about religious liberty here on Point of View with Kelly Shackelford and other people with First Liberty and other individuals about that? Some of the issues of politics and the fact that we are a republic, and some of those ideas are really rooted in such things as the Mayflower Compact, and then even some of the things of the Puritans as well, the body of liberties. And then when we talk about the economic issues, as I've said before, who would have predicted a couple of years ago that you would have somebody running for the presidency actually advocating socialism? Who would have expected you would have some members of Congress that are convinced that socialism is better than capitalism? And right now, even an interview being done with an individual that actually went to Moscow State University, won the Lenin Award, and now wants to do what she can with the banking industry to move us in that particular direction as well. So some of these lessons that we can learn, and we'll talk about that after the break with Jerry Newcombe, can be found in the video and the film. And of course, you might want to go and find the interview that I did with Rod Gregg, and certainly some of the things we've done on the teaching of Thanksgiving. As a matter of fact, tomorrow, I think in the second hour, we have one of my teachings where I quote some of the very people that Jerry was mentioning, Bancroft and Paul Johnson and others. So you will certainly have that opportunity. But we want to put some of this in your hands, because let's face it, your children and your grandchildren have not been learning about this in the schools. Maybe you haven't learned about it yourself, and that's why we want to provide you with some of those resources. resources. So we'll come back and talk about maybe some of the lessons we can learn from the Pilgrims. Dr. Jerry Newcombe will be with us. I'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes with Dr. Jerry Newcombe. Let me just say again that we want to try to equip you with all sorts of news, information, commentary as we do so often. But as we get ready for Thanksgiving, we have today the Thanksgiving quiz, so you certainly can download that. It's free of charge. Tomorrow I have a commentary on Thanksgiving, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, I have a teaching in the second hour tomorrow, which actually quotes from some of the individuals that Jerry Newcombe just mentioned. And of course, I just pointed you to an interview we did with Rod Gregg. So lots of great resources, but perhaps the one we wanted to focus on most is this new film that certainly is just an interview with a who's who of individuals getting commentary on the Pilgrims and the Plymouth Colony. But I thought I would come to you, Jerry, for just a few minutes and see if we can learn some lessons. We were talking about this idea of religious freedom, and we know the Pilgrims for that. But I think we can also learn some political and even economic lessons, and some of that's covered in your film, isn't it?
Yes, it is. For example, the Pilgrims were able to do their voyage because they borrowed money from some London businessmen who were sympathetic to their cause. Unfortunately, the company in London that lent them the money had the stipulation that essentially forced them to have a socialistic type situation where everybody would get the same of amount of crops or the rewards for their work, no matter how hard they work or how little they work. Now, the Pilgrims were very model Christians, and they were very much into love thy neighbor as thyself and all the, the commands of God. But socialism always undercuts productivity and character. It undermines character and so forth. And it didn't work for the Pilgrims. And after a couple of years, Bradford, their governor, said, "Okay, forget it. We're going to do this. We're going to parcel out the land. Each family, whatever, will X number of the different plots, etc. But you keep what you want. You can share what you want afterwards, but it's yours. You till it," and so forth. All of a sudden, production just skyrocketed because, let's face it, man is basically sinful. And, God has said in his word, "Thou shalt not steal." And implied in that commandment is that private property is sanctioned by God. And it's speaking of private property. When the Pilgrims came there in a situation where, the Indians had the land and so forth, they worked things out where they paid the Indians a fair price for whatever land they got. And
Yes.
in fact, they worked it out where Massasoit, the chief, had to approve any particular land sale. Later on, other Europeans that, let's say, wanted to, barge in or whatever in that area, Bradford made it, known you have to have the sale of your land approved by Massasoit. Otherwise, forget it. And in fact, in the documentary, we even show some of the land deeds at the time. And another thing, and this to me is the biggest thing of all, and you were hinting at it when I was listening to you a moment ago, when I wasn't on at the moment. But basically, here's the deal. When the Pilgrims were blown off course and they were under no government jurisdiction, they ended up taking the spiritual covenant that they had made 14 or 15 years before they had even become a particular congregation based on the Bible. A covenant is just an agreement under God binding a group together, with an agreement and written down. And so anyway, they took their spiritual covenant and they made a political version of it. It's called the Mayflower Compact, as you mentioned. And the Mayflower Compact was the first step in ultimately the creation 150 years later of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. It's basically, in a nutshell, self-government under God. And it mentions how they came for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, and they covenanted and combined themselves into a civil body politic. And that Mayflower Compact, signed November 11, 1620, begins in the name of God. Amen. So another quote from Dr. Kennedy, he said, how did America begin? It began in the name of God. Amen.
So good. I might just mention that we've talked about some of the other resources, but of course we have booklets on everything from capitalism and socialism to the ones on socialism. Actually, one of the great illustrations in that is this whole idea of the Pilgrims and the lessons that we learned there. But just before we go any further, I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that in addition to having the link to this film, The Pilgrims, we also have a link to jerrynewcombe.com and a couple of books I might want to point you to. One is his latest book, America Amnesia, which is some of the commentaries he's written. And just a few minutes ago, you were talking about some of those historians that you have benefited from. And a lot of that ends up in this book that you have co-authored with David Gibbs III, One Nation Under God. So there's some great resources. So if our listeners say, you've sort of whet my appetite, around the Thanksgiving table, we watched the Pilgrim film. We read a couple of other things that have been written, and I want to teach my children or my grandchildren the true history. They can also go to your website and find some of the information as well, can't they?
Yes, they can. And we're constantly, getting back to the original sources, just like David Barton does, because, and my good friend Bill Federer as well, bottom line is, when you actually look at what people said in the early years, you realize, man, so many people who came and settled this land, not all by any means, but so many of them did, for Christian purposes. I mean, let me just give you one quick example. Why is it when you see a license plate from the state of Connecticut, why does it say the Constitution State?
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution was written in Philadelphia, which is in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. Well, the answer is because the first fully developed Constitution written on American soil was written by a group of Puritans who founded Connecticut, and they wrote it up in 1639 in response to a sermon from 1638 by the Reverend Thomas Hooker, and it mentions in that Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the first fully developed Constitution on American soil, how they came for the reason they settled that colony was for the purity and liberty of the gospel of our Lord Jesus. That's why Connecticut is called the Constitution State. But once you start, digging as far as America and America's, roots, you realize, oh my goodness, we have a huge debt to the Christian faith. And It's a shame, the way so much of this has been expurgated. Now, you went to Yale, right, for some of your degrees?
Yes.
One of your degrees? Okay. And Yale, to their credit, has something called the Avalon Project. The Avalon Project of Yale provides online all kinds of source documents that were important to the whole American experience and actually Western civilization in general. So, for example, we've been talking about the Mayflower Compact. Okay, well, you can find it at that. And when we were interrupted on the phone system, I was telling you also one of my sources that I drew heavily from is called The Annals of America, 1976. It's a series by the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it's basically source documents in the American experience. And volumes 1, 2, and 3 have been very helpful to me when dealing with the settling issue and the settling era and the founding era of America.
Well, again, we're just about out of time, and I just wanted one more time to mention that if you would like to know more about this particular film, The Pilgrims, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. You could go to providenceforum.org, but this is probably the easiest way. And so, Jerry Newcombe, thank you for putting this together. Thank you for joining us, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, and 400 years at that.
Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is the day before Thanksgiving, and we're so grateful that you could join us. And for this about half an hour here, we're going to do something we've never really done before, but it's such a good idea. Our producer, Steve, suggested, why don't we bring in some individuals that are kind of behind the scenes here at Point of View, who are absolutely crucial to the success of this program. You may have had a chance to talk to one of them if indeed you call in during our Truth Team, because sometimes they're answering the phone, but if not, you'll have a chance to meet them. And also, for those of you that would like to watch online, you might say, what do they look like? Well, you can actually go online right now, or later on even watch it on YouTube to see what they look like. First person I'm going to come to is Karen Manley, and she is involved in all the graphics behind the scene, all the things that are put on our website. And so, Karen, it is great to have you in studio. I know this is not something you do every day, but thank you for joining us.
It's not something I do every day, but it is awesome to be here.
Tell us what you do, because to try to cover all the aspects of what you do, it's going to take a minute or two, isn't it?
Yeah. My main focus is that I want to reach as many people as I can through our online presence. So whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, and also our website, all of those things fall under my purview for creating the graphics that go with them. You and Penna write viewpoints each day, and I take those words that you've written and I try to get images to go with them. And then I post those things on our website, and I also schedule the emails to go out. So pretty much if you see anything with a graphic, a picture that goes with it, and a story that goes with it, I've had my hand in getting that where you can see that online. So
again, digital content is part of that. Mm-hmm. Now, I've got one of these booklets, but I know as well one of the other things is that in order to make me look better than I deserve, you edit not only and make sure that I don't make any typos in the viewpoints commentaries, but also putting these booklets together takes some time. Explain that if you might.
Indeed. And that's another one of those things where you or Liberty or Warren write the booklet or the Outlook magazines, and we have a team that does the editing. And then I take all those edits and I collate them and try to make sure that all of those things that need correcting get corrected before they go to print. We put together the photos and the images that you see. So we try very hard to make things look really professional and make it easy for you to go online. I came to work for Point of View through my husband, who worked here for longer than I have. And when people would ask me, what is Point of View and why is it important? I would tell them what it is it's a resource for the body of Christ.
Yes.
If you want to know about pornography, if you want to know about education, if you want to know what's going on in Washington, D.C., we're a resource. You can come and you can find those things out on our website.
And again, if you go to our website right now, you're going to see all the graphics, and you can see, for example, the Truth Team, Unchanging Truth. You can see Viewpoints, Take Action, the videos, Pray for America, all that. And if you say, who does all that nice stuff? Well, you just had a chance to hear from Karen. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute, but I also want to bring another woman in, and that is Ivy Nichols, who might be a little more familiar to our listeners, because from time to time I've done some interviews with you in a Millennial Roundtable. But again, Ivy, it is great to have you here, but give us a little bit of an idea of what you do at Point of View.
So I'm Warren's administrative assistant, our president, But I do a variety of other things as well. I help with the deadlines for some of our different campaigns. I help with some of the events that we do, whether it's sometimes in Alaska or in Dallas. Also, occasionally I get to write for the Outlook magazine, take notes for the board meetings. So just a variety of different fun things.
And I might just mention, if you've come to an event that we've done, for example, you were with us in Alaska. And so that was, anybody up in Fairbanks said, wait a minute, I know what she looks like, because she was actually at one of these events, or people in Dallas would know that as well. And you also do quite a bit of writing. And that is, again, I can't count the number of times even this week I've quoted at least one of your articles, because we were talking about China and a number of other things. So you bring a kind of a research kind of mindset. And so again, you talk about multi-talented women, which we have two around the table here. I mean, you're kind of an event planner, you're a writer, you're an assistant. And so those are just a few of the activities that you're involved in every day, right?
Yes, that's true. They're all super fun.
Well, again, she's our enthusiasm, isn't she, Karen? But I might also say one thing as well. If you want to eat well, these are the two women. Matter of fact, if you go to our kitchen right now, there is some great food there. And I made the mistake of eating some of your pumpkin pie before I came on. So if I fall asleep, nudge me, because it was so good. But talk about maybe some things that you're thankful for. You've had a chance to be at Point of View for a while, and you've had a chance to meet some of our listeners, at least by phone. But what's your thoughts about where we're going and what we're doing and what you're thankful for?
Well, I love the fact that we get to bring guests on the show that are, well-known celebrity type people. But I also love when we have guests that aren't really very well-known, who are amazingly knowledgeable about the subject that they want to talk about. So we have that, like I said, it's a resource, and it's an amazing thing. We keep all that stuff archived. So y'all can go back and look at it and listen to it, years worth of things. And I'm thankful that resource is available, and that I get to have a hand in making that happen for folks. We do a lot with not a lot. And so I think that's a cool challenge, and I love being able to do that too.
They always talk about Marines, few good men. Well, it's a few good men and women. These are the women here that are actually there's two other women that we maybe will interview sometime in the future as well. But that's it. I mean, people say, I've had people come up there and say, oh, well, you're in this building that has 15 stories. We didn't used to be. We used to be on a single story one. And they think we have a good portion of the building. And they come in, they go to the 10th floor, and then they go to one part of the 10th floor, and they come and meet 2 or 3 people, and they go, that's it? I mean, this is a national program, but again, been able to do a lot with a little because of the talent of some of you. And Ivy, you're the youngest on the staff and probably the one that's been here the least, but anything that you can think of that you've been thankful for, and some of the things you've learned here at Point of View?
There are a few things that I'm thankful for. There's a lot to be thankful for here. One of the things is the positivity of Kerby's different talks that he does every day, because a lot of news is just filled with negativity, but here we get to hear positive things, but also what we can do to make the world a better place, which I think is a good channel for our energy. And I also appreciate that we are listener supported, fully listener supported, which is why we do campaigns every year, several times. Which means that we are not supported by any one group or organization. So we're committed to truth, and we're committed to telling you what's actually going on rather than putting a spin on it because we're sponsored by some group. So I really appreciate that, and I think it lends to the truth of our program.
Just before we take a break, Karen, I might come back to you, because when people will see something that talks about Giving Tuesday, you're the one that put that up there.
Yep,
and
that's
next
our
Tuesday.
next campaign.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed.
And so, again, there's just a great opportunity for you to support this ministry. But if you've always sort of wondered who are some of the people behind the scenes, these are two of those individuals. And I know probably everybody's going to be a lot calmer now after they don't no longer have to be on a live radio show. But I thought I would pick out one other staff person next hour. But first of all, women, I want to say thank you for all that you do around here. Thank you for the great food, and thank you for your positive spirit. It's great to have both of you in studio today.
Indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, one more that you might have a chance to hear from, and then we'll get into some of the issues in the news this day before Thanksgiving. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Thanksgiving is tomorrow, and I suspect that you are doing lots of things to get ready for this special day. Let me suggest you add one more item to your to-do list. Visit our website and download a copy of my Thanksgiving quiz. Thanksgiving is a wonderful time to gather as a family, but I also believe that it can be a great time to teach our children and grandchildren about America's godly heritage. I created this short quiz to be a conversation starter around the Thanksgiving table. You know, we used to go around the table before the meal and ask our children to tell us what they were thankful for. After a few years of hearing about how they were thankful for their cat, their doll, their video games, I knew we needed to do something else. The Thanksgiving quiz was born out of that frustration. It has 19 questions and answers on the Pilgrims and the Mayflower Compact, as well as some questions and answers about the Christian heritage of America. Who were the Pilgrims, and why did they leave Europe for America? Why did they celebrate Thanksgiving? What is the Mayflower Compact, and why is it significant? What lessons did the Pilgrims learn about work and even free enterprise? How did the Christian faith influence America? These are just a few of the sort of questions that you can ask around the table and give short answers. Perhaps it is time to recapture the importance of Thanksgiving. On the bicentennial celebration of the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, Daniel Webster declared the following: "Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light and labored in its hope, and they sought to incorporate its principles with the elements of their society and diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, or literary." It is my hope that this quiz will help your family see the importance of Thanksgiving. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, one of the things we did just a minute ago was had two of the women sort of behind the scenes at Point of View, and I thought I'd bring at least one of the men, and that's Ron Ford. Now, I think there are going to be some things that we can certainly talk with him about in terms of our finances. You'll find out he's involved in that. But also, given the fact that some of you actually are in different locales where we've done events, probably more people have met Ron than even the women. But Ron, first of all, thanks for being here, but tell us a little bit about what your job entails.
Well, basically, my job is, and when people ask me that, I tell them, I give them a sarcastic answer. As you know, that's my typical response.
He's the staff comedian, by the way.
But my real job is to work with all of our donors.
Right.
As Ivy mentioned last segment, we are listener supported.
Yes.
And we couldn't do that without our support, our donors. And we have some of the most amazing people that support our ministry. And it's just a real pleasure and a blessing to spend time with them, to work with them, and to be involved with them. And what is great is because I've done this now for 7 years, I've gotten to be part of their family. They're part of my family too, so which is great.
And I think that's part of the point that I was making is that if you are a donor, you may have actually received a phone call from Ron or maybe Warren Kelly, one of the two that most likely would make phone calls, although I tend to call some of those individuals as well. So they may know your voice, but maybe they meet you face to face when we do some of those events. And so really what you're talking about is the development of the financial base. And as we just mentioned a minute ago, it is amazing to me, having worked with other ministries, sitting on, as my wife will say, more boards than any individual should be sitting on, because I really want to support different ministries. It is amazing to me how much we get done with a very small budget and a very small number of individuals that are on staff.
It is unbelievable the amount of information that we put out, not only during our radio program during the day, but also all the information that Karen talked about before, our booklets and our Outlook and all that information, our daily emails that we send out. It is a powerful resource. It is probably unmatched anywhere else because we cover everything from the election to the resurrection.
Yes.
And so that's what's amazing to me is that we don't just get in on politics. We cover the gamut, and it's hard for any other program to do what we do, but because of our expertise and our involvement not only in the political arena, but also in the Christian arena, we're able to do that.
And that's one of the things that maybe is hard for you to explain to people, because I know it's hard for me sometimes because people find out that, oh, you do a radio show. Oh, so it's a political one. Well, yes, but we also do theology, apologetics. Oh, well, okay, so you do kind of theology stuff. Well, yeah, but we also do kind of science and economics. And they just can't put you in a slot because we actually believe that the Lordship of Jesus Christ should extend over every area of life. And so you find a topic we don't address, and it's going to be a pretty obscure topic because sometimes people that listen to us on the internet, we have a place where I rattle off all the different kinds of topics we address. And I've had people, Ron, sit in that very chair where you're sitting right now, listening to that and go, whoa, just before I go on the air, because we do cover so many different topics.
We do. And what's amazing to me is that in the 7 years I've worked here and been part of this team, I've met, I don't know how many people that have said to me, I've been listening to Point of View for 40 years or 30 years or whatever. In fact, a year ago, I was in the post office, and the gentleman behind the counter saw our address on one of the envelopes that I had. He said, I've been listening to Point of View for 35 years. And because I deal with our donors, I said, can I get your credit card?
It's so good. But again, that's part of the point that you like to make, and that is that we are listener supported, but there is a reality in that we still have to pay the light bill. And of course, going up on satellite now, we're also using some other ways to get this to various radio stations. There is a limited amount of expense, but the advantage is because, as Karen was alluding to just a minute ago, because we are supported by so many different donors, and Ivy talked about this as well, we're not beholden to anything. I've pointed out before that it really doesn't surprise me that there are certain topics that even certain radio stations and television programs don't cover, because those topics are related to the advertisers, and they don't want to offend their advertisers. Or sometimes you have one editor that's maybe telling everybody, we're not going to talk about homosexuality, transgenderism, climate change, whatever it might be. You almost get the sense that they're told that there are certain topics we can't cover. And the bottom line is there's a little bit of security in the fact that donors sometimes may disagree, and sometimes you hear them, sometimes I hear about some of the things we cover, but we're just dedicated to giving you the truth. And that's why I think this listener-supported model is, in some respects, much better than the advertising model that you see with a lot of television and radio programs.
I have a friend who passed away a couple of years ago. You know Jamie Jordan, who passed away. But Jamie, one of the first times I met Jamie was he said, Point of View helped develop my worldview.
Yeah.
And he goes, I could not have gotten that from anywhere else because of what you guys do and what you guys are capable of doing. He said, I've been listening to when Marlon Maddox started it, and I've listened to Kerby Anderson, and it helped shape who I am today and what I became and how I live my life. So you can't get a biblical worldview anywhere else from a program unless you come to Point of View. You can't get it from all the other talk shows. Can't get it from Fox News or CNN. But you can help shape your worldview here by listening to Point of View. And that's why it's so critical for us to have our donors continue to give and to support us and to partner with us as we move forward. I mean, we're coming up against, again, toward the end of the year. Next week is Giving Tuesday.
There you go.
We've got a match from one of our donors on that one as well. And then our end of the year match is coming up. We're working on developing that. And if anybody's listening and would love to help us, we would certainly love to partner with you too. So we have a lot of challenges ahead financially, but thankfully we have such incredible donors and listeners who say, I want to be a part of what you're doing because you are changing lives.
And that is, again, one of the things that I've noticed, just the incredible loyalty of our donors. But you said something in passing I didn't want to escape just before we finish off this interview, and that is this idea of the match. Because if you want to talk about one other thing that Ron Ford does, is every once in a while you go to one of the donors that say, I really appreciate what you're doing. Would you consider maybe giving us a match? And you have one, as you said, for Tuesday, the Giving Tuesday. But if anybody else would want to be a part of that, that is the case. And the idea of even doing a match is something we stumbled onto years ago, because we're not that sophisticated to think about all that kind of stuff. I mean, I know they have whole departments on development, but that's not what we do. But one person said, I give you a match. I'm going to put $1,000 on the table and encourage people to match it dollar for dollar. And we go, oh, that's a good idea. And it's become so significant that the last time we were, Fairbanks, Alaska, first question after we had done a presentation was, is there a match tonight? So obviously, if somebody is one of those individuals that would like to step forward or be one of a package of those, that's, again, a phone call that they can make to you, isn't it?
Exactly. I'm available. I give out my cell phone number and I answer my phone all the time at home. Drives my wife crazy, but I'm available to talk to you and tell you what it's about because, again, we can't do this without our support. This doesn't happen just by flipping the switch. I mean, God has been gracious to us and been giving to us, and He's blessed us tremendously. We've been on the radio now for almost 50 years.
Right.
So we have felt God's grace and His blessing, but we continue to want to do what God wants us to do in this area of biblical worldview and understanding. And so we can't do it without our partners. It's just impossible. And you got to have money to, as you said, flip the light switch on and keep things plugged in and keep things going. But we are grateful for those that have definitely partners with us in the past.
I know one thing you're thankful for is you have a son who actually not only went to law school while working, but passed the bar. So pretty smart family here.
He did. Both my boys are smart kids. They get their intelligence from their mother. They get their personality from their mother. They don't get a lot from me other than probably a few headaches. But other than that, they are good. And I am blessed to have a wonderful family. They help with our events. My wife is joyously volunteers to help join in some of the events, and so I'm grateful for them. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve with people like Kerby Anderson and Warren Kelly.
So again, if you go to one of the events, you'll meet Ron and his wife. Of course, if you are out in other parts of the country, sometimes Ron is there as well with Warren Kelly, myself, and others. So Ron, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
That is just a brief look at three of the individuals behind the scenes. Of course, we've also mentioned Andrew, who does the engineering, Steve, who you've heard before, is our producer, Warren Kelly, who's the president, and we've had many of them in, but we'll get those other two women that maybe aren't here and one of the other men to maybe sometime join us. And it'd be
beauty before, now you got the beast.
Yeah, beauty first, beast. And let's take a break. We got some news items to look at, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-3776. 5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour before Thanksgiving, and so we'll spend a little bit of time with you. I just might mention as a program note that tomorrow we will have a tape, but in the second hour, this hour, we actually have a teaching that I've put together on Thanksgiving if you'd like to learn a little bit more. And knowing that people tune in and tune out, I know some of you perhaps have had Point of View on for 2 hours as you are cooking or getting ready, and so maybe you've heard the entire program, but I know a lot of people kind of tune in and tune out. And if you did not hear the first hour, we spent some time talking about this film called The Pilgrims with Dr. Jerry Newcombe. Also talked about the fact that we have a Thanksgiving quiz, which is available today. Some more information about Thanksgiving tomorrow. And so that is all available on the website, pointofview.net. But I did want to, before I maybe get you to share as we finish the program off today, what you are thankful for, talk a little bit about this issue of criminal justice. I'm holding up again our booklet on criminal justice, which I probably need to update now because of so many things that have happened. And first of all, earlier in the week, we spent some time, and even last week, talking about the trial with Kyle Rittenhouse. And so that is something we have covered. But let me, as a program note, mention that we also have all three men who were charged in the death of Arbery, Ahmaud Arbery, I should say, actually convicted of murder as well as malice. That would be Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and Rhodey Bryan. And so those are individuals that were on trial, and I did want to cover that particular story there as well. So we have been in the midst of a number of trials. The one, of course, that has gotten a lot more attention is the Kyle Rittenhouse particular trial, but this other one of Ahmaud Arbery, the death of him in which he was gunned down in Georgia, wanted to mention that as well. And as we look forward to what's going to happen in the future, you will notice that I've posted a couple of columns about the looting that is taking place. Now, as one individual wrote, Carol Markowitz, if you actually recognize that telling the police that we don't need them, and if you keep talking about defunding the police, first of all, people in the police department take that seriously. And it is interesting in this particular piece pointing out the number of individuals now who actually were surveyed. And I'll just use New York City as one example. But of the 5,935 New York police department officers, that survey found that 56% said they would not become police officers if they had to do it again. Think about what that means for the future, because they're also maybe discouraging young men and women who want to go into law enforcement from going in there. And as Carol Markowitz points out, the kind of people that we have drawn into law enforcement are a certain type of individual. It's not exactly glamorous. It's not exactly one that is high paying. It is certainly dangerous for many. And as a result, if you continually beat the drums of defund the police and Black Lives Matter protests turn into riots, you're going to have fewer people going into the police force. You also have some wrong-headed individuals that actually have been calling for the defunding of the police department. And so we shouldn't be surprised by some of these ideas. As we say on the program here, you don't have to understand too much about economics to know that if you pay people not to work, what happens? Well, they don't work. You don't have to know a whole lot about criminal justice to know that if you spend all your time criticizing the police, and the people that supposedly have your back say we need to defund the police department, you can kind of see what's going to take place. And so my first article is from Rich Lowry, which he refers to the shoplifting capital of the world. And he first kind of gets us smiling by talking about all these different small towns that are the capital or whatever. Having grown up in California, Castroville, California, the capital of artichokes. And for those of you up in Maine, Farmington, Maine, the capital of earmuffs. One in Arkansas, I did not know this, the capital of spinach. All real funny. Then he gets to the serious one. It'd be quite likely that if you really wanted to designate a city as a capital, That would be San Francisco. And he talks about what is happening in San Francisco. And of course, what has been happening in California for some time goes all the way back to Proposition 47, which made thefts of less than $950 or less, in other words, less than $1,000, a misdemeanor. And then you actually have the possibility that unless you steal more than $1,000, you might not even be prosecuted. And you have this situation that you've probably seen if you've watched YouTube videos. And as you are maybe going out tomorrow after Thanksgiving for Black Friday opportunities, some of you might run into some of these mobs that are actually sort of smash and grab mobs. And what's so intriguing is that as you dig a little deeper into this, even though he's talking about San Francisco, the illustration he uses is Walnut Creek, California. Now, having grown up fairly close to that, matter of fact, the first camera I ever bought was in Walnut Creek, California. I think it might be possible that the first suit I ever bought was at Capwell's there in Walnut Creek, California. But for those of you that live in another part of the country, this is definitely a suburb. This is not really even that close to San Francisco. This is not a place where you would expect to have a lot of criminals, a lot of homeless, and the rest. And yet, of course, he tells the story of 80 people engaged in a large-scale smash and grab robbery of Nordstrom's there in Walnut Creek, and then all sorts of others. Of course, then they talk about all of the various attacks on Louis Vuitton. That's in San Francisco's Union Square. You have the same thing happening in Beverly Hills. Of course, we have talked in the past about Walgreens, which says that their San Francisco stores actually experience theft 5 times above the national average, and you've had them actually decide to close down some of those locations. And even Target and Safeway have been reducing their hours just to try to reduce their exposure or to any kind of actions that are taken. And this article talks a little bit about something I address in this book, A Biblical View on Criminal Justice, and that is what's called the broken windows policing. And the idea is that if you go to a place where there's broken windows, pretty soon there are more broken windows. But a place where you actually have the windows replaced, or you go to a place where there was graffiti but it was scrubbed off, you actually tend to have less vandalism, less crime. And there's a really good theory behind that, which I go into a little bit more in the booklet. But when you start looking at the fact that you're having now storefront windows in Louis Vuitton and Saks Fifth Avenue, even in Beverly Hills, and when you have now many of these Apple stores, many of them fortunately are in malls, so they get a little more protection, but in many cases these rings of smash and grab are actually going to places where they can get Rolex watches, Apple products, and the rest. You're really dealing with something very, very different. And I thought I might just mention that my next article on that comes from Guy Benson, in which the title of this is, the experts say, don't refer to the Bay Area looting as looting, guys. He said, I'm just kidding, of course. They didn't say guys. That's gendered and heteronormative. But the wonderful experts are instructing us to not use the term looting to describe mass looting and brazen shoplifting plaguing, for example, the San Francisco Bay Area and other places. He, again, once talks about the case there where 80 people stormed and robbed a Nordstrom in California. And lest you think there's no relationship to what I'm talking about now and what you might experience over the next couple of weeks, guess again, because there are many people that are starting to be really concerned about what it's going to look like on Black Friday, especially when you have some of these deals that are available and people rushing into stores, but also others using the pandemonium to actually steal things. And so it is kind of interesting that the district attorney in San Francisco, who's oftentimes been leading the charge for defund the police, did even herself point out, you know what? I'm outraged by the looting in Union Square last night. We're seeing similar crimes across the country. I have a simple message. Don't bring that noise to our city. Stand by for felony charges. Let's hope so. But again, words have consequences. And ultimately, right now, when we say that these are not riots, they're just protest, when we say this is not looting, this is just undocumented shopping. This word I just came up with, but you really have to realize that there are consequences to some of these actions. So I've posted some of those articles for you to think about. Maybe you'll run into some of that when you go shopping in the next couple of days. When we come back, though, if any of you'd like to join us, love to know what you're thankful for. Give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me again wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And again, if you have maybe just joined us, we've been talking about in the first hour this film, The Pilgrims. And if you'd like to watch it, you can either rent it or actually buy it. And it's something that I think would be excellent to educate yourself. But most importantly, if you're an adult listening right now, you've got to understand that your children and your grandchildren really don't understand some of these issues. They really weren't taught this in the schools. And so we're going to have to counter program and provide some alternatives. But let me real quickly get to one other issue. My third article is one by Stephen Moore. He said, we need a little more Milton Friedman right about now. And I thought it was interesting because yesterday I had a piece by Nash, if I remember right. It was on Milton Friedman and Thanksgiving, but Stephen Moore decided that it would maybe be time to mention him as well. And this is the way Stephen Moore said it. He said, not long ago, President Joe Biden made an offhanded comment that Milton Friedman isn't running the show anymore. And Stephen Moore, who's been on the program with us before, he's been with the Wall Street Journal, National Review, and all sorts of other groups, and actually for a while was even an advisor to Donald Trump and to others, said that the president has seldom spoken more valid words. And that's where the trouble has begun. He said if you were to rate the three most influential economic minds of all time, you'd be hard-pressed to come up with a better trio than Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, and Milton Friedman. Now, again, if you're maybe not familiar with economic history, Adam Smith actually wasn't even technically an economist. He was a philosopher and actually wrote, for example, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and then wrote, of course, the seminal book, The Wealth of Nations. And that was published in 1776. By the way, if you want to talk about key dates in American history, 1776 was a pretty good year. Declaration of Independence, John Maynard Keynes, of some of the writings by some of the other authors at all that time. Just amazing. But anyway, so Adam Smith, of course, was in the 18th century, but really set forth the idea of what today we call the free enterprise. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, I held up just a minute ago our Capitalism and Socialism book, and I give you a little bit of brief history there and then recommend some things. John Maynard Keynes is unfortunately having a greater influence than he should. He was a British economist who, by the way, I've learned a lot more about his moral life and know that he was really quite a disaster. But because he lived for the moment, he never really thought and never really had much concern about the future. So he really gave justification for the ideas that we can spend our way out of a depression, that actually printing more money doesn't make any difference, which is, of course, the philosophy being used right now. And sadly, a fair number of individuals that are economists actually cut their teeth on his writing because Paul Samuelson, who is really kind of one of the disciples of John Maynard Keynes, wrote the book that most use in college classrooms today. And then, of course, you have Milton Friedman. I might mention, for those of you that say, well, is there an alternative to that? Yeah, the so-called Austrian economist, Ludwig von Mises and some of those. Well, I won't get into all that. But Stephen Moore goes on to say that few academics have done more to advance human freedom than Milton Friedman. He was the leading apostle for free enterprise. He had a profound impact on major policy decisions, including the case for parental choice in education, expanding free trade, and even the abolition of the military draft. He was forever suspicious of government power for good reason. And he says his two masterpieces, his two books that are best known, Freedom to Choose and Capitalism and Freedom. And if you hadn't read them, why not, he says. Biden should. They were economic masterpieces written for the common man and hence read by millions. By the way, you can see still some of the documentaries that came from those books out on YouTube. But near the end of the article, Stephen Moore puts it this way. He says Milton Friedman was also famous for saying that inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. He warned that when nations devalued their currencies, they could lead a nation down the road to ruin. So my homework assignment, if you will, for you over the next few days is I suspect many of you will either go online or maybe even go into the stores and just take a note, if you would, for us of how you've seen prices go up. Now, that could be prices gone up at the gas pump, prices going up for something that a year ago you would have paid such and such for. Now the prices have gone up much more because we are in this time of maybe not runaway inflation, but substantial inflation. Inflation numbers, even using the government figures, they're the first time in 30 years that they've been this high. If you use my numbers, I think it's the first time in 40 years that they've happened. But he goes on to say that now we have policies that are the exact reversal of what Friedman taught us. They are also a reversal of basic street smarts and common sense. So raise your hand if you really believe that passing a $3 trillion spend and tax and borrow bill will reduce inflation, even though the spending blitz under Joe Biden is already tripling the inflation rate. And he uses $3 trillion. Some people say, no, it's only listed as $2 trillion, but I shared with you the other day it could be as high as $4.9 trillion. What's a few $1 trillion amongst friends? But he goes on to say, even more absurd is the idea that raising tax rates to the highest in the world will increase output and the economic's health. On the other hand, this will make America, he says, less productive, reduce the production of goods and services, which will raise prices at the cash registers. And so you give us a little bit of an indication next week when we gather together live on Monday. What'd you find out? Were prices going up? I'm sure they were. He finally concludes by saying Bill McGurn, who's with the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, recently wrote a must-read piece noting that Milton Friedman may get the last laugh. Matter of fact, I read that and thought it was pretty good due to the reckless policies. And the argument was Friedman may be vindicated. But Stephen Moore ends by saying this: a lot of us are not laughing at the damage to our country and our finances. We are crying. So even next week, I've got a commentary coming out on inflation, and I've pointed out before that in the 14 years that I've been doing this commentary, interestingly enough, I've written about inflation, I figured out about a dozen times. But no longer am I writing about the theory of inflation. I'm talking about the reality of inflation. And, of course, the best I can say is that let us hope that some of the spending that is being proposed right now, which will be voted on up or down in the United States Senate, let's hope that it doesn't pass, because the impact that will have, the negative impact that will have on you and your family will be very great. And as we get together next week, obviously we will have an action item to allow you to contact your members of Congress, and that is certainly the case. But just as we encourage you to go to the website and find some of those resources, let me, just as we wind down today before Thanksgiving, to mention that the Thanksgiving quiz is available today on the website. About 20 different questions. You can use them around the table, and some of them are pretty easy, and it's a great way to teach your children and grandchildren about America's godly heritage, and maybe get a little bit more focus on some of the things we should be thankful for in this country. And then tomorrow my commentary is on some of the history of Thanksgiving and some of those lessons we talked about: religious liberty, God's provision and protection, some of the political implications, and even some of the economic implications. And those are resources we make available to you on a regular basis, and they're all free of charge. So I hope you'll take the time to find those and use those. As you go there, of course, you'll have the Viewpoints commentary on my Thanksgiving quiz. You also have some of the interview that I did with Jerry Newcombe. We have a link to the Pilgrim's film, which you may want to show to your family. And as we wind down for today, let me just mention that we are, as we talked about with Ron Ford, dependent on your financial gifts. And if you're thinking about a time when you might want to make that gift, Giving Tuesday is less than a week away. And so we'll focus some time and attention on that. And I just heard him say we've got a match, so that will make it even more intriguing and encouraging to you. I want to thank Andrew for his help as an engineer, Steve for his help as a producer. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.